In this section and first step of effective meeting facilitation, we're talking about, number one, why it's so important to be really clear about the purpose, why this is the number one mistake that bad meeting facilitators make, of not being clear on what the clear purpose is of that meeting, the objectives. Then understanding different types of meetings, so being clear on what type of meeting you're having. Is it an information meeting? Is it a discussion meeting, decision meeting? That helps you craft a really good agenda and running good meetings. Then how to specify the objectives, so being clear on the overall purpose of the meeting, but then also the specific objectives. And lastly, assessing your audience and assessing how important a meeting is, which will help you decide how much time and preparation to put into the meeting, because not every meeting requires the same amount of preparation and effort. I've already indicated a little bit. I think the most important learning is to be really clear about the purpose of your meeting. So I've been part of so many meetings where you dial in, you attend the meeting, and then people chit-chat a little bit, and then they start asking a few questions, bringing up topics, and then 10-15 minutes later, you're a little unclear of what the meeting host or facilitator is trying to achieve in the meeting. And at the end, you've had maybe a good conversation, maybe some interesting thoughts came up, and then somebody says, oh, that was an interesting meeting, let's keep the conversation going, which is code for, I'm not sure what this really meant here, what's happening here, and what we were discussing. Especially when you talk to more senior people, when you have more experienced people in a meeting, sometimes they're asking you, what is the goal of this meeting? Like, what are you trying to achieve? Like, what do you want from me? That's an indication that you haven't done a good enough job of being really clear of what you're trying to achieve. Meetings are not social gatherings, right? A meeting is not there to bring a few people together and just have a good time. If you want to be an effective business professional, you need to be sure that your meetings are effective and that there's a purpose, a drive, a goal behind your meetings. And I like this quote from Bill Gates here on the slide, which is saying, the purpose of a meeting is not to figure out the question, not to discuss what we should be doing or what the meetings should be about. Good meetings should already have a clear objective, meaning somebody should have already spent hours of preparation and thought about what to achieve in the meeting, who to invite, how to structure the meeting, how to run the meeting, at least for more important meetings. Obviously not for every meeting, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, of how to decide which meeting you want to over-index and which ones, like one-on-ones, where you don't have to prepare a lot for it. And one framework I think that's very helpful to be clear about the purpose is thinking about what kind of meeting you're having. And on a high level, I think there are three types of meeting. There's an information sharing meeting, there's a discussion meeting, and then lastly, there's a decision meeting. And all of these meetings should have different objectives and a bit of a different structure of how to approach them. Even though a meeting can have different components, if you have a 60-minute meeting, maybe one agenda item on the agenda is part of information, another one might be discussion, another one decision. I think it's important to think about what's the primary purpose of the meeting you're having, because quite often it's either or, it's one or the other. And let me spend a few minutes going through these types of meetings so it's clear what I mean by them and how they're different from each other. So the first meeting, the information sharing meeting, the primary purpose is to share information and have everybody aligned on the type of information that you're sharing. And typically that means minimal discussions, minimal interactions. And so here on the right-hand side, a few examples of what these types of meetings are is town hall presentations, all hands. So if you have a senior executive, share his thoughts to everybody. I think here, obviously he could send in an email, but having a meeting, physically seeing the person, is often more valuable and effective, also for morale and for people to hear directly from the senior executive, and with the ability to have a Q&A at the end, I think is more valuable, more effective than sending a few bullets in an email. The next one, on project status update. So this could be you're leading a project, you're a project manager, you're updating your steerco, your senior executives on progress. And quite often, even though they might feel like a discussion meeting, they are primarily an information sharing meeting. It's each of the workstream leads, etc., shares their updates, what they've done, what they're doing next. And there might be a bit of questions here and there, but quite often there isn't an intense discussion because the senior execs aren't always very involved in the topic. So it's a bit more of an update. And then once there is a bit of a challenge in a work stream, some bottlenecks, then there might be more of a discussion around it. And then lastly, onboarding new employees. Quite often, if a new employee joins a company, the HR department or the learning and development department would host a onboarding session where they share maybe some benefits, maybe some learning opportunities, and a bunch of logistics that are helpful for the new hire. And obviously they could also send that in an email. Quite often they do that as well, but hearing directly from the people and for the new hire to ask questions is very, very valuable. And so this sums up the first type of meeting, an information sharing meeting, which, as I said, the purpose is to simply share information, make sure that people get the information, and allow for a bit of Q&A, but typically it's minimal discussions. The next meeting is a discussion meeting, which I would say most of the bad meetings end up being discussion meetings without a clear objective of what the discussion is about. And good discussion meetings have a clear question on a clear objective of what we're discussing. Because discussion meetings could end up moving in a off topic, starting very different types of discussions. But really good discussion meetings are focused on a specific question. And the purpose is to discuss trade-offs, discuss different options that we could pursue. For instance, if we decide to hire an external vendor to do our accounting, the discussion could be about a few different options, like vendor 1, vendor 2, vendor 3. And so the different experts, it's important to have the right experts in the room that actually have knowledge about the topic. Like, let's say an IT person, let's say a finance person, discussing the different vendors and which ones to go for. But the purpose is not to already make a final decision. It's to have a structured discussion about the different options and the trade-offs between them. And typically this is more effective in smaller groups. If you have a lot of people in the room, there's a higher risk of derailing the conversation, because typically there's one more senior person that takes over the conversation or somebody that just likes to share and talk a lot. So typically the smaller, the better. And I already shared an example of a meeting that would be deemed a discussion meeting. A few other examples here: survey question discussions, people sharing other survey questions they want to add to an employee survey. The Netflix example, I think, is a really effective one where they move discussion meetings a bit more offline, where they ask somebody that wants to change something, that needs a decision. They ask somebody to open a public document and have everybody in the company see what they want to do, and give them an opportunity to publicly in the document share their thoughts on the decision or on the options. And then it's still for the decision maker to make the final decision, but he has to solicit input from other people, which I think is a very effective way of ensuring that people at least hear concerns, they hear issues, trade-offs before making a final decision. And the last meeting type is a decision meeting. Ultimately, the goal of projects, of a ton of meetings, is to get to decisions, right? You want your company to be effective, and you being effective means making decisions and following through. Obviously, making good decisions. And so the purpose of a decision meeting is to have the right decision makers in the room that have or need to have input into the decision and make a decision in the meeting. A lot of decision meetings end up being discussion meetings. Number one, the questions might not be clearly defined, or people are not fully ready to have the decision, so they might want to discuss again and delay the decision. So it's crucial to be very clear on what the decision is, which could be having a slide which literally says the decision and then yes, no, and forcing people to make a decision at that point in time. However, it is also sometimes a legit approach to say, okay, I think we're not ready to make a decision here. Let's have another discussion meeting. Let's do a bit more research and then come back together in a week or two and then make the decision. But really important is to be clear on what the decision is, what the question is that we're trying to answer. And then as a facilitator, doing a good job of bringing the group back on topic and forcing or nudging people into that direction. A few examples could be a decision meeting for an acquisition. If a company is interested in buying another company, at some point there needs to be a decision, like a buy or not buy decision. So that typically is being done in a meeting. Or a vendor selection meeting. So we talked earlier about there might be 3 vendors that qualify or that could potentially do the job. And so then there might be a decision meeting about which vendor to go for. And lastly, a hiring committee meeting. Sometimes hiring decisions are being made as a committee, so that could be a decision meeting. And so the reason I shared this framework is I want this to help you be clearer on the type of meeting you're having, which should help you refine the purpose. Like we talked in the beginning, the purpose is really important to be clear on what the purpose is. So one step is to be clear on the type of meeting you're having. And once you know the type of meeting, you can go one step further and really being specific about what you're trying to achieve. On the left-hand side, you see a few typical examples of what meeting invite descriptions look like. For instance, project status, compensation, inventory management. That could be a meeting title, right? You would have you on the invite, other people on the invite, but it's not clear what the objectives are. It's not really clear what the success of this meeting means, like what is really expected from you as a participant or you as the facilitator in general for meeting participants. You know, for the first one, project status, that we're probably talking about the project and how the project is going. But it's not clear if it's just sharing updates, how it's going, if there needs to be a decision about changing work streams, about replacing leaders, about the consulting company, decisions about like extending them. That would be way more specific. And it's really important to go from this generic title to something more specific, because if the objectives are blurred, unclear, generic, it will lead to an ineffective meeting, frustrate attendees, and also will affect your credibility in the organization. As I talked earlier, being an effective meeting facilitator is one input into how you're perceived across the organization, right? And on the right-hand side, I'm sharing a few good examples. So for the project status update, more specific objective would be to say, discuss work streams at risk and decide on mitigating actions. It's still a bit generic because it doesn't specify which ones are at risk, but at least it says we're focusing on the ones that are at risk and we're discussing and deciding on what to do about it. So even already in the objective, it's clear, okay, there's a discussion part and there's a decision part. Or the next example, decide on a launch strategy for the men's shampoo. So here it's also clear we're talking about specifically the strategy for a new product. It doesn't say, the meeting invite doesn't say shampoo product. It's about discussing the strategy. We're not talking about product design. We're not talking about ingredients. We're talking about the strategy overall. The other ones, gather feedback for the consulting project pitch deck. Apparently there's a deck. We want to gather feedback from everybody. So probably here it would make sense to send the deck in advance so people have time to review it. And the last one, inform employees about the new referral plan policies. So this is a classic, as the name already says, an inform meeting, sharing information meeting. Probably the reason why you would have a meeting is to make sure that people actually hear it, so it doesn't get buried in their email inboxes. Since it's a new employee policy, probably critical for people to know about it. And I shared a few good examples. One popular business goals framework is the framework SMART. You might have heard about it. I don't want to spend too much time on it. It's just something for you to think about, whether this is helpful for you. The idea behind it is that really good business goals have these 5 criteria. They're specific, being really clear what it is, who does it, what, where, why. It's measurable. It has a clear metric which tells you, okay, we've achieved it. We've achieved that goal. It's achievable. It's within your ability to achieve it. So if you're the head of product, but the goal is about accounting, probably it's not within your world. It's probably not realistic for you to achieve it. Or if you're the head of North America, but the goal is about Australia, performance in Australia, that's obviously not a good goal. Relevant, is it within your priorities? A little bit similar to the achievable. And then time bound, by when is it expected to achieve? So it's a bit similar to the measurable, like what's the number we need to hit and by when. And so very specific good goals have that. I think for meetings it's probably a bit over-engineered. You don't need to necessarily specify all of that in the meeting objectives or in the agenda, but in general it's a good framework to keep in mind. One very interesting example I found online is from the University of California, which requires every meeting to complete this statement before the meeting, which you can quickly see. It shows these 3 meeting types again: information sharing, discussion, and decision. So they ask everybody to complete this following statement. The purpose of this meeting is to inform you about X, discuss Y, and decide on Z. And this forces you to be really clear on what the things are and whether it's to inform, to discuss, or decide. Which I think is a great example and something you can also apply in your own meetings. Even if you just think about it in advance or write it down in your notes app, you don't have to necessarily say it in the meeting or put it in the meeting invite, even though I think it's helpful. This is a good framework or idea to apply in your own business world. So we've spent now a lot of time talking about being clear about the purpose, preparing for the meeting, being clear about what the specific statement is and what types of meetings you typically have. Now I want to spend a few minutes talking about which meetings to prepare for and which ones to prepare a little less, because it's not uncommon for calendars to look like this, where you have 3-4 meetings a day or 5 to 10 meetings a day. And obviously it's hard to prepare for each and one of these meetings. What I want to emphasize here is you need to prioritize which meetings you want to spend a lot of time preparing and thinking about the whole process of clarifying the purpose, specifying the objectives, and the topics we're going to talk about next. Like this, what I'm going to share in this course is, I would say, the more comprehensive way, which I would emphasize or recommend only to do for the very important meetings. Maybe only for 3-4 meetings a week, which you can see here. Let's say the red meetings are important ones. And so the other ones, more casual meetings, you can only spend 30 minutes before the meeting to think about it, 5 minutes for some of the very, very informal meetings like coffee chats, etc. Here on this slide, I created a high-level framework, a 2x2, which shows on the x-axis the audience size, how many people will attend the meeting, and then on the y-axis, how senior is the audience. And at the bottom, more junior audience, on the top, a more senior audience. In this 2x2 matrix, the further right and up you are, the more you should prepare for a meeting. So on the right hand side, a large, and then all the way up, senior. So if it's a large and senior audience, let's say it's an executive team, it's a presentation to the board, probably days, weeks preparing for those types of meetings. Typically you would only have those once a month, That's how at least I think about it. Like these like red meetings here at the top right, you would probably only have once a week or once a month. But these types of meetings are really important. They require detailed preparation. They have a high impact on the company, but also on you personally, your credibility, your success in the organization and your career. So you want to over-index preparing for those meetings. And then the orange meetings here, some preparation. If it's the one on the top left, meaning it's maybe a one-on-one with somebody senior or 2-3 people, senior people in a meeting, you want to definitely do some preparation, but there isn't a need to over-prepare, pre-wire the deck with 5-6 people 2-3 weeks in advance. That's probably a bit over-engineered and probably a bit too much. And the same at the bottom right, if it's a large group, let's say you have 15-20 people, but they're fairly junior, you want to prepare. Since it's a large audience, you want to make sure that they get what they're looking for. You can't just wing a 1 hour meeting with 30 participants. Since it's going to be a bit more information sharing, probably not so much discussions and adjusting during the meeting. You want to definitely do some level of preparation for that. And then at the bottom left, the green ones, little preparation. If it's a one-on-one with somebody more junior, the meeting is not as critical, not as important, lower risk of a bad meeting. Obviously, you don't need as much preparation. So this could be a coffee chat, could be one-on-ones, etc. And this is a very simple framework, but I think it helps to bring home the point that you can't have a detailed preparation for every meeting, and you want to prioritize and decide which ones are important for you and which ones are not, and then spend more time during the preparation and preparing for the more important meetings. Lastly, in this section, wrapping up, lessons learned, what have we learned, what have we discussed? We discussed it's really important to be clear about the purpose of a meeting. It's the number one reason why meetings go south, why people leave meetings frustrated is because it's not clear what we're trying to achieve. There are random discussions, conversations, but without drive towards a common goal. Knowing the type of meeting you're having is important. It helps you clarify the purpose. It helps the audience be on the same page. Is it to inform? Is it to discuss? Is it to decide? And then lastly, specifying the meeting objectives, being really, really crisp. We talked about the University of California example, which I think is really helpful. And then we just talked about, with all these meetings on your calendars every day, every week, you want to make sure that you prioritize which meetings are more important, which ones are less important, and then over-index your preparation for the more important ones. I hope this was helpful, and I'm going to see you in the next session.